Cheers. Happy Friday night. I had never done what they call a vlog or a podcast, but I figured I would do a little video for all my friends, especially my friends out there in the surveying community. And first, I want to give a little disclaimer. I am not in any which way or another knocking my engineering friends. God knows, if it wasn't for you, surveyors wouldn't have half the jobs they have now. Not that we need your help, because God knows there's a lot of surveying jobs, and I don't know, some of your jobs are pretty easy, so that's always a good thing. But that being said, I want to recap a little story, and I'm gonna call this this blog "Behind the Boots," because I'm standing behind a pair of boots. Seems like a good, catchy thing to call it. But the other day I was contacted by a client who needed an elevation certificate. Now, if you're unfamiliar with elevation certificates, that means you hadn't had to deal with one, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That means you do not live in, near, or around a flood zone, as defined by FEMA or the local flood administrator in your town or county. But this client of mine called me because I had actually surveyed his tract about a year and a half or so ago, and he bought this piece of property in Rankin County, and it was in a flood zone, and he knew full well when he bought it, it was in a flood zone. What he didn't know was that just because it was in a flood zone, the whole, hey, I'm going to build a house, I'm going to buy flood insurance, and it's all cut and dry, was, he didn't realize what he was getting into. Well, what he got into, unfortunately, was the fact that the city, the county, the local authorities, the flood administrators, the federal government, and everything else, they wanted a little more information other than, hey, I'm going to build up real high and I'm going to make sure my property doesn't flood. So I did the survey, and on the survey, I actually stated that, this property is situated in a flood zone, Zone A, no base flood determined, and that's that. Pretty much, you're done with the survey. Every now and then you get called back and like, well, what do I do about it? And you just basically tell them, well, it was disclosed when you bought it. I hate being the realtor either. They ought to explain this stuff to folks, but a lot of times they don't. I'm not knocking them. Realtors give me a lot of work. I appreciate it. But their thing is to sell property. And really at the end of the day, once they get their commission, it's over with. Surveyors retain liability forever and ever and ever. And then after they die, somebody comes back and asks them, or their family, why they didn't do it right or something. But that's all aside. Anyway, I was interested because in this and telling this story because my client actually called me and asked if I could do an elevation certificate for him on the property. I immediately pulled it up and researched it because it'd been well over a year since I'd done the survey, and I saw it was in a Zone A, and I'm like, oh crap. And then I looked at it. It wasn't the kind of thing that I was qualified to be able to give him the information he wanted. I said, yeah, I can do an elevation certificate. The best I can do for you is to shoot the elevation on it and tell you how far, your pad's being built up and this and that, and then you can go plead and beg with the insurance company to see what kind of rate they're going to give you. He said, oh, no. He said, after I bought the property, and I went to the proper authorities there. They told me what I had to do. I'm like, okay, well, what'd you have to do? He said, I had to get a flood study done. I said, wow, great. Did they give you a BFE? He said, yeah. He said, it cost me $5,000. $5,000. That's $5,000. This was a 2.6 acre tract that was selling for $10,000 an acre. So he basically paid $26,000 for the piece of property. And then he paid $5,000 to an engineer who did a flood study on it and told him how high he needed to build his pad up above what the ground was. And then he had to turn around and pay me to come back and tell him if it was above it, because that wasn't in the agreement for the $5,000. It was kind of like, well, we'll tell you after the fact or before the fact, and then you got to hire somebody else to come back and tell you how high it is, if you need to add more dirt or less dirt or whatever. The only issue I've got with that was, we're talking about a raw piece of property out in the woods in Rankin County that was worth $26,000, and he's going to build a house on it. We all know what houses cost now. I mean, we might be talking about a $350,000 house. The survey was about $1,000. Raw land, right to begin with, $1,000. The flood study was $5,000. The elevation certificate that I come back and produce, because they wouldn't do that, they just told me what I had to go check, but I've got to sign, seal, and certify. Now, whether their numbers were correct or not, that's it. FEMA accepted that. They're also going to accept mine, but if it floods after the fact, I got a $750 elevation certificate in it, stating that I swear to God Almighty and the U.S. federal government that these elevations are correct. Now, I did notice on the flood study that it said the approximate BFE is XXXX. What I didn't notice on the flood certificate that I filled out and signed and stamped was that the approximate elevation of the ground is XXXX. What I saw was, I hereby certify as a licensed surveyor in the state of Mississippi that the elevation is this, the base flood is this, and I swear, on my firstborn's life, that we are above it or below it or at it, and that this insurance company that's going to base everything not on the BFE established by this company, but based on this elevation certificate that I produce, saying that he's above or below whatever it is. And by the way, he is above the BFE they established. That I guarantee that, which really puts all the liability on me. All that being said, as a surveyor or as an engineer or as an architect that does elevation work, we could get into all the things of make sure you go check this, double check that, and everything else. The legalities and the liability that you put into doing this kind of work, sometimes, it's quick dollar. It didn't take me any more than 2 hours to go do that. But I can say this without a shadow of a doubt. I watched historical flooding happen this year in central Mississippi. I don't know if it was 100-year flood type stuff, but I do know that water reached places that aren't even in flood zones. And people, that didn't have flood insurance, they lost money, they lost their personal possessions, they had to pay for a lot of stuff. And I guess my main point is be very careful, but especially for the surveyors out there, be very wary about doing elevation certificates. There's a saying that you don't dive off into things that you're not an expert in. The fact of the matter is, I'm not an expert in flooding. I'm a pretty good expert in taking measurements, from here to here, across here, over there, and things like that. I'm pretty good at that. If I wasn't good at that, I don't think I would be a professional surveyor. But when you look at the fact that the person that develops the BFE yet maintains none of the liability for where and how high the house was built, because they're going to put it on me to come back there and check and make sure that they did that correctly. And I'm the one that's going to certify and say it. And by the way, you don't just get off by telling them how high it's supposed to be. You'll possibly be liable if the contractor didn't build it that high, because they're going to turn around and say that, hey, well, you told me here, I built it to here. So it becomes a he said, she said type thing, my word against yours. Be very careful when you do this kind of thing. But also, what I'd really like to say, 2 hours worth of work from a professional surveyor that is guaranteed that the elevation of a floor of a house is this far or this far above where it's going to flood, maybe worth more than the $5,000 that the engineer or hydrologist or whoever has the ability to do these things. Like I said, I'm not qualified to do it. I can't do hydro studies or anything else. I'm just a surveyor with a level. But ironically, the person that gets to decide that and charge $5,000, they never seem to have a level to go check their work. We surveyors are. And that is issue number 1, episode number 1 of Behind the Boot. Have a good Friday night. Cheers.